Welcome back, guys. It's Module 7. We are one module away from finishing our deep dive into the new fourth grade mathematics standards. This module is going to cover measurement, data, and reasoning, Standard 6. As always, I like to begin going over our math standards timeline. Just a reminder, over the next couple of years, we will be participating in professional learning with the goal of understanding these new standards. And by school year 2023, we will begin with full implementation. As we're continuing on reviewing and learning about these new standards, I would be remiss if I did not bring up number talks again. I know I sound like a broken record, but number talks are such a foundational way to have students start to learn some number sense. One of the biggest conversations we've had within our school is that students don't know their facts or students don't understand their facts. And a big way to get that to happen is by first, at a foundational level, teaching them number sense. And a great way to do that is through number talks. Now, I have seen tons of videos on the internet of what different number talks look like, the different hand movements and motions you can use in your number talks. I'm a simple gal. My students just put their fist on their chest and tell me how many strategies they have. I also found this great little graphic that's talking about how students can stick their thumb out and say, I'm still thinking. Thumb up means they have a solution in one strategy. They can do two solutions in a strategy, and then the kind of like surf's up, dude sign would mean that they agree with someone else. Because ultimately, when you have 21 to 30 kids in a class, you're not always going to get to hear from every student. But it's a great way to get those students who don't normally speak up to feel a little and start to feel a little more confident in their thinking. Because ultimately, as we've talked about before, creative thinkers are typically the ones that kind of go unnoticed in a math classroom. And number talks are a great time to let them know that the way they think is valid, especially if they're coming up with the right answer in a way that you haven't even thought of, which happens so much in my classroom. So I know it will happen in yours. We do already currently have some resources for number talks. I want to say that everyone should have access to it. It's a hand to mind kit. It's that circular graphic there. It's purple. If you don't have one, ask around your school and see if anybody does. It is actually specifically for fourth grade, and it's got these really great cards that give you like number strands to get you started on number talks. I've loved it because it's a really easy, low prep way to do number talks. I've also already shared some resources with websites that already have number talk problems on them as well. This number talk 10 big ideas, I was kind of obsessed with it because it talks about valuing all students' contributions. And it helps students learn to articulate their thinking. So that's something that my students have really struggled with, is articulating their thinking. And that's across the board. And sometimes they can't quite find the right words to explain how they're getting their answer. And so many times I get the conversation of, oh, I used standard algorithm. And I'm like, how did you do that in your head? And they have a hard time breaking down the problem and articulating that they are breaking it down in their head. And as soon as someone else shares an idea, it's like the light bulb goes off and they're able to share an idea as well because they're starting to figure out how they're solving it. It also is just a great way to celebrate and cultivate your community of learners in your classroom. It gives them the whole idea that productive struggle is important and necessary. And through that productive struggle, you get to see them truly start to get a deep understanding of numbers. I also linked a couple resources at the end of this video for you to check out about number talks. But I would highly suggest looking into your number talk kits you have in the classroom. And if you have any questions about Number Talks or books or resources that I may not have mentioned before, please feel free to email me. It's something I'm super passionate about, and I think it's such a meaningful way to make connections and have those students develop a really deep understanding of number sense. All right, now that I've ranted for 5 minutes about Number Talks, let's jump into the standard. Measurement and data and reasoning. Time, metric, measurements, distance, elapsed time, liquid volume, mass, and length. So in every module, we've included this learning progression. It's really important that we understand what the students should know or ideally will know when they come to us, but also what the expectation is going to be when they go to 5th grade. This learning progression breaks down the key concepts of math and shows how those key concepts are going to transition from kindergarten to 5th grade. The measurement expectation really focuses on using the 4 operations to solve word problems. So there's also a really big focus on analyzing data. So though computational fluency, addition and subtraction, and multiplication and division are probably the most heavy hitters when it comes to the key concepts for this standard, you also are going to see the other key concepts as well. So take a minute, review over these, kind of get in your head what the expectations are for our 4th graders, but also think about what the expectations will be for them in 3rd and in 5th grade. So now that you've reviewed the learning progression, we're going to jump into our standards document. I think it's a really good thing to continue to include this because it kind of shows us the contrast of each expectation. So the standards are always going to be listed at the very top, and then below that on the left-hand side will be the expectation. It'll be the expectation number and then the actual expectation. To the right of that is the evidence of student learning. You'll notice that for every standard we've reviewed or we've covered, the evidence of student learning doesn't look exactly the same. So for example, for this particular standard, expectation 1 gives strategies and methods, fundamentals, age and developmentally appropriate, terminology, and examples. Whereas expectation 2 only gives fundamentals and strategies and methods. But that goes into the type of standard it is. And as we continue to look deeper into this standard and we look deeper into these expectations, you'll see why they differ and why one includes so much more evidence of student learning versus the other. This standard has 3 expectations. This is the final page in the standards document for MDR.6. So this is the expectation 3. Note the highlighted expectation as well as the evidence of student learning. Read over this quickly. It will help you as we dig in a little deeper into the standards. Well, for MDR.6, measure time and objects that exist in the world to solve real-life mathematical problems and analyze graphical displays of data to answer relevant questions. There it is again, those buzzwords, real life and relevant. You are going to notice as we dig into these expectations that those words are going to be repeated again. It's going to be so important that our students are accessing this information with relevant problems and relevant examples. Because if they can make a connection to it, they're going to have a much deeper understanding of it. Measurement and data reasoning, Standard 6, Expectation 1, use the 4 operations to solve word problems involving elapsed time to the nearest minute, intervals of time, metric measurements of liquid volume, lengths, distances, and masses of objects. I want to stop right there for a second to talk about that. This expectation is very explicit. It talks about metric measurements. We will no longer be talking or discussing or teaching customary measurements. The focus is going to be on metric measurements. Students will also be expected to answer problems including and involving fractions with like denominators, and also problems that require expressing measurements given in larger units in terms of smaller units and expressing a smaller unit in terms of a larger unit based on the idea of equivalence. When we think about that, we typically think conversions, but we need to kind of shift our thinking from the typical conversion idea more to the idea of students understanding that 1 kilogram is equivalent to 1,000 grams. So them making that connection to the value of a kilogram versus the value of a gram. Some strategies that are going to need to be used are going to be measurement quantities, using number lines or diagrams that feature scales of measurements, and also students will need to be able to record measurements in a 2-column chart. Pay really close attention to this expectation. Previously, the 2-column chart was included as MD.6. There is a big shift in this because now it is no longer in the actual standard, but it is listed in the strategies and methods. So that is one of the strategies that will need to be explicitly taught to then use it to analyze the data or organize the data once they're determining it and using those 4 operations to solve the problems involving time or metric measurements. Again, I want to reiterate, conversions are not the expectation at this grade level. The focus is on helping our learners see the equivalence between the quantities that are represented in different measurement units. For example, in the example, it says, if you have a prescription for 5,000 milligrams of medicine and upon getting it filled, the dosage reads 5 grams of medicine, did the pharmacist make the mistake? The goal here is for students to make the connection that 1,000 milligrams is equal to 1 gram. Therefore, the pharmacist did not make a mistake. So the goal is for students to make the connection of the equivalencies of the different measurements, not to convert them. And you will see, and it is going to be very prudent that you are using fractions to solve these word problems within measurement and data reasoning standard 6 expectation 1. But those fractions are still limited to denominators of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 100. That identically mirrors our previous fraction standards of addition and subtraction with common denominators or like denominators. And when using time, it should be to the nearest minute. This expectation is also very clear about those measurement terms. It is not the whole metric system, just weight, capacity, and length. Within weight, it's going to be grams and kilograms. For capacity, milliliters and liters. And for length, centimeters, meters, and kilometers. If I'm being honest, this is my favorite expectation out of all the expectations of these new standards. Expectation 2 is ask questions and answer them based on gathered information, observation, and appropriate graphical displays to solve problems relevant to everyday life. This is a student-led standard, and it makes my teacher heart so happy. You will notice this is the one that I was talking about, has only 2 evidence of student learning, fundamentals and strategies and methods. Basically, this is the standard that kind of like culminates a good bit of what the students have already learned at this point. So those relevant problems should include word problems that are meaningful to students' real lives and their real environment. It's going to be really important for the problems presented to be interesting for the learners so that it's going to make them naturally curious and have them want to dig deeper. So my favorite part about this is it says under strategies and methods, questions should be student generated. This is also going to be the perfect way to assess and review expectation 1. This is by far the most open-ended expectation. You're going to notice on the standards document that the fundamentals surround students creating problems that are meaningful to their environment. So for example, our STEM teacher has created an awesome school garden, and students could gather information and create questions based on the garden that could focus on plant growth, watering times, or even the fertilizer to soil ratio. This could also tie into expectation 1, which is using those 4 operations to solve word problems, or excuse me, solve problems using measurement. So after you teach expectation 1 and you're teaching expectation 2, it can be something that you teach right away, but really expectation 2 is something that you could really do throughout the year with your students creating questions, maybe based on the science standards they're learning. So my mind goes to weather and water cycles. So maybe tracking the rain over a certain period of time, and students can create and generate questions about that. I also love the idea of students creating these questions and then giving them to other students in the class to answer. And that's a great way not only to get them excited, but also get them involved. Maybe have students come up with the questions for the quiz for this expectation based on something that as a class you've been working on collecting data for. I just really love the fact that this is student led. I know I said that when we reviewed the expectation, and now as we go through the example, again, I'm gonna say it again. Like, it is so cool that our standards are moving in a way that is putting student thinking at the forefront, because ultimately, like, that's what's going to get our kids excited about school. That's what's going to get our kids engaged in math, is when they have that buy-in and they have a voice. This is the final expectation in our measurement and data reasoning standard. This is expectation 3. Create dot plots to display a distribution of numerical or quantitative measurement data. So the key to this standard is going to be using rulers that are only marked to the nearest eighth of an inch. Students will use these rulers to take measurements on things. It also ties into expectation 2 when I was talking about measuring the garden, our school garden. So students should also be able to ask and answer questions involving the addition and subtraction of fractions with common denominators. This is going to tie to NR4 expectation 6, adding and subtracting fractions with like denominators. So this is line plots. This is something that we are familiar with. It's already a standard that we have. It isn't changing a whole lot, but I think the key here is going to, again, be making sure it's applicable and interesting to the students. So this would also be a great way to really tie expectation 2 in. So students could use the data and questions that they're creating to then go back and create those dot plots to display the data. This is a really straightforward example. So it is just a simple dot plot with heights of plants in inches. So students can use rulers to measure the lengths and record data. So this is a really great opportunity to get hands-on and even cross-curricularly tie these standards to maybe your science standards. So you could start a small class garden, or like I said, we have a garden at our school. So maybe work with your STEM teacher to create an ongoing project for your students to work on. You could also plant the little seeds in the Ziploc bags and watch them sprout and measure the heights of those in inches. You could measure the heights of students in your class, maybe have students go home and measure the heights of their pets. There's so many different applicable ways you can model this expectation. You could have students think of things that they could measure in the classroom to put on a dot plot, something that you would want to compare. Maybe it's the height of books. But it's a good way to get students involved and get students to take that ownership of their learning. I think that that's what I like most about measurement and data standards, is it's a very natural thing we do. We use it constantly in the real world, and I find as a teacher, I do not struggle to find examples for measurement and data as much as I do for other standards. So I do love that we're kind of being given some freedom and flexibility here to really look at students, their likes and their dislikes. So I know a few modules back, I talked about the Beyblade math. This would be a great opportunity to analyze the data from the Beyblade math. So maybe you did that project for adding and subtracting, and now you want to translate that project. You kept the data, and now you bring it back out and you look back at that data and you create a dot plot as a class. So there's just a lot of really great ways that you can use or have students understand this expectation. Here are some links to the Georgia DOE resources: Learning Progressions, Summary of Changes, and the K-8 Standards. If you haven't explored these, I highly encourage you do so. It's going to help you develop a deeper understanding of these changes and the new standards. So here's 3 links to some really great classroom resources. The first one is Tang Math Games. I love this. This is a newer resource to me, but it's got everything from addition and subtraction to fractional games, and I actually feel like my students are going to get something out of playing these games. So 10 recommend. The next one is just a quick YouTube video of number talks and how you could introduce them to your students. And the last one is a Number Talks resource page. So it's a website. It gives you some information about a couple of different Number Talk books. The first 2 are books that I personally have and I use and I love. So maybe talk to your principal about potentially looking into getting you some Number Talk resources as a grade level team. It also shares some additional resources and websites that might be useful as you dive into this new journey of Number Talks. So major takeaways is the measurement standards are drastically condensed. Conversions are no longer the goal, rather an understanding of equivalence between quantities. The customary system is out, and the focus is on metric measurements of grams, kilograms, milliliters, liters, centimeters, meters, and kilometers. And problems should be relevant and real-world applicable. So before we sign off, your assignment for this module is going to be for you to ask one question. Really dig deep, think hard. It can be about any of the modules that we've done so far. It can be about a specific expectation, or it could be a general question. And if you think of anything that you particularly need, please feel free to email me, or if you have any burning questions that you need answered immediately, please email me. And I will do my best to try to help. Also, start thinking about resources that would be helpful for you moving into teaching these new standards. So is there something in particular that you need that you don't have? And if you guys don't mind, start thinking about ways we could all share resources so that we are all kind of able to collaborate, whether that is a shared Google Drive, or maybe your school already has something really great that you guys do to share information or share ideas. But if you could just email me that would be great. So then we can kind of get the ball rolling on that one now, because I think ultimately, no, we aren't using these standards next year, but we are going to still be learning about them and digging into them. I think it's really important that we go ahead and start thinking about resources and materials that we can use to teach them. And again, as always, if you have any questions, please email me. It doesn't even necessarily have to be about this module. It can be about something that we've discussed in the past. Thank you so much for your time. I know that these modules can be long and tedious and probably not what you want to be doing in an afternoon, but I really appreciate you hanging in there and just loving our babies like you do.